I'm not a certified floodplain manager, no.
Right, but did your job get the other duties as assigned?
Some of them, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, well, I'm Tara McFarland, and as we said, there's a Department of Natural Resources, and we are a division called the Office of Water Resources. So today we're doing more of an overview. I'm doing an overview of what kind of services and what programs we have. And then Erin's going to go ahead and talk a little bit more detail about some of the specific flood programs that she works on. I have been working at DNR for about 5 years. I'm an environmental engineer, civil engineer by trade. And right now I work in a section called Engineering Studies. And what we do a lot of modeling. We look at potential dam removals. We were just talking that Carpentersville dam that you guys just got removed in this area. That's something that our office worked on. And so we have engineers, we have GIS support, we have a survey crew, but I'll talk a little bit about what our program does. Not a lot of specifics, but we'll be here afterwards to answer questions. So, and this is just, I know you guys are very familiar with your floods, but in our records that we did in 2007, you guys had a pretty spectacular flood event for this area. And then I know you guys also have some issues with ice jams, and this is just, we have the spring floods and then we have the winter floods. So those are just areas that I'm sure you guys are very familiar. So today I'm going to break it up into the services and programs that we have, both at the beginning, what we can do now. This is a flood preparedness workshop of what kinds of programs that we have that you can do when you have time, there's no flood going on, and you can actually do some planning. And then we're going to talk about what kinds of services are available during a flood. And then at the end, things to do afterwards to help mitigate or to recover from those floods. So I think you all know that Illinois is pretty wet. It's not a matter, I keep hearing this, it's not a matter of if you're going to flood, it's a matter of when you're going to flood. And this is, I know you guys maybe are familiar, there's hazard mitigation plans, and you're supposed to look for your community for all types of disasters, but floods like earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, but by far flooding causes the most costly natural hazard that your community can experience. And it's just an interesting fact, if you look at that map, all those are flood plains, and we'll be talking, Erin will be talking a little bit more about that. But Illinois has the largest number of floodplains inland, obviously not compared to a coastline, but we have a lot of floodplains, and there's a lot of flooding that could occur throughout the state. So Office of Water Resources, Erin and I are in Springfield, and that's where our DNR headquarters are located, and we're just a group within that DNR organization. But we also have two other offices, one here close by, more in Bartlett, and then we do have one downtown. So we have different groups in each of those offices, and at the end I've got some contact information. I'm assuming we'll give you our slide, or you've got it now, and if you guys need more information. But there are 3 main programs within our Office of Water Resources, or I'll say 3 divisions. And capital programs is one of them, and that's the one I work under for engineering studies. And so when we talk about the different phases of a flood, you might have to reach out to different parts of our organization. But so capital programs is one, and then resource management, which is where Erin works under, and they do more of the regulatory, the permits, and a lot more, and I'll talk about that. But then we also have the coastal management, and that's part of the Office of Water Resources as well, and that's actually up here in Chicago. So these are some of the programs that we have that help, or the goals are to help communities during these phases, but this is the stuff you can do ahead of a flood, when you have time, when you can actually do planning. So the NFIP program, this is just a placeholder slide. Erin's going to talk a lot about that. but just know that that's part of the Office of Water Resources. NFIP is something that you, again, she's going to
I'll
talk
cover
about
it. You'll hear
it.
more about it, don't worry.
But just to get familiar with it, and I think that's something, if you have questions, we're a good resource for you to reach out to. We also have a mitigation program within the Office of Water Resources, and that happens after a flood event, and we find out that there are areas that are repetitive losses or continue to flood, and decide that they don't want to experience that again. We do have some governmental money available for mitigation projects, as well as doing community buyouts. Sometimes we can help an area make purchases for some of those homes that keep having repetitive losses, but then we also can help them but then that land has to be never built on again for perpetuity. So that's a program we have, and if it's of interest for your community, you can reach out to the Office of Water Resources. The mitigation objectives, just so you know, I did just mention this, that you do want to reserve that floodplain space. And Erin will talk about it more, but we know it's a very challenging to develop inside of a you can just grab them. It's very challenging to develop when you develop inside of a floodplain, because what you do when you build something, you affect all the people around you. So that's why we have the regulations. That's why we have these kinds of talks to talk with the communities, to teach them of what you can do to prevent that, both within your community or within a watershed, because what you do affects the next town down in the Fox River. We also have some planning assistance. I said I was in engineering studies. We do sometimes help with your county hazard mitigation planning efforts. We can sit on the committees. We can offer our services and our technical expertise. And then we also work on other things for the state. And just to let this group know, there's been that in 2022 we published the state water plan, and that was a multi-agency effort where all the agencies, EPA, DNR, IEMA, emergency management, all the organizations in the state that actually do anything related to water came together and came up with 145 recommendations for what we need to address in the next 10 years. So just letting you know that that's out there. It's very transparent. There's a state water plan website, and you just type in Illinois State Water Plan, and it's every month or every quarter we have meetings, and we're trying to show you how far along we've gotten on all those recommendations. So I just bring it to your attention because it needs to be updated every 10 years, and we invite stakeholders and communities to bring ideas of just global things that we need to fix within the state, but also even just certain areas of types of work that might need to be done. And flood mitigation is a big component of that state water plan. In the engineering studies, we have the ability that communities can reach out to the Office of Water Resources and request us to study an issue that you might be having. So our team, we have hydraulic modeling, we have engineers on staff, and what we'll do is we'll look at alternatives. And that usually the state will do that for free. If you have a problem, we just have to bring somebody from your governmental entity needs to bring it to our attention. But I will warn you that if it is an immediate problem, we are minimized staff, and so sometimes it might be 3 to 4 years before we can do that project. But it doesn't hurt to get on the list, and if there's something for your long-term planning, I just want you to know that it's available. We can provide, we can do cost estimating to look at those alternatives, and sometimes we can even do just small little technical assistant projects with you. So just know that that's an available service, I guess I would call it. So now that's all for planning, things that you can do ahead of time. But now we're in a flood. And so what kind of resources are out there for you? So I am actually the head of the flood surveillance program. And during a flood event, we'll send teams out in the field, and we will send flood reports out to the emergency operations centers. We'll develop maps to show the extent of flooding. We know we have weather forecasts. We're able to take that information and develop mapping to show the extents, to help the communities come up with ways for their evacuation plans, show what roads are covered, show what areas we think might flood. And so all this information we send out to the communities as well as some politicians, just to know what's coming. So that's just part of our flood surveillance program. And then we also do public outreach to try to let you guys know that what information is out there. But so what we do is when we go out in the field, we take our cameras, we have iPads and our drones, and during a flood, especially if it's going to be a higher than moderate or major flood in your area or record breaking, we come out and we take data. We document the flood, and then we take measurements, and then lately we've been able to just post that information online, and we share it with the emergency responders as well as the communities. Same thing, here's some of our drone crew. We do document high water marks, and that's really important for communities to know what their high water levels were. And then we're also able to send our survey crew out and get the actual really refined elevation data. And then we use that data in turn for some of our modeling that we do. When I say hydraulic modeling, that means we take your elevations and we're looking at the rainfall events, and then we're able to predict where that water is going to go along a river. And then we also share this information with the other agencies. We're all trying to go out and get information. In the past, a lot of times, each organization just held their own data, but we're really making an effort nowadays to reach out to the Corps, IEMA, and give them and share all that information. We also recently developed a inundation mapping tool, and this is not yet available for your area, but I'm letting you know because we continue to work on it. But right now we have it for the Mississippi River and the Illinois River. And when this comes out, what this does is it's a dynamic map. This is just a screenshot of 3 different things. But a lot of people that live along a river are very familiar with their rain gauge or with their stream gauges. And so again, if you look at the weather forecasting, a lot of times the websites will estimate what that stage is going to be. So they might say, we'll just say your river stage is going to be at 50. And everyone's like, well, yeah, that's great, but what does it look like? So this map, this tool allows you to plug in with these slider bars that you see in the middle. You can just slide what that elevation is, or that stage that they're predicting, and it will take that flood map, the stuff in blue, and that will show you where that water might go. And again, that's really helpful during response to your community.
When do you expect to see that come into the Fox River Valley?
Well, it's next, and I have another program I'm going to tell you about. We have to get the most recent models, and they're working on the Fox River models right now. So when we get that, then we're able to take all that data and put it into this. So I would say maybe 3 years. That would be my hope. But
That next month, 3 years.
this is another tool that we have out there. It's called SAFER, Structures at Flood Risk. Same thing right now. We're working on the Des Plaines. We're waiting for the Fox River model. But this is a really good tool for the community. It actually takes all that flood extent that I was talking about, and then we know the value of all your structures, and then we know how high the water is going to go and how much it can flood each structure. So as part of this, we go through along the river, and we go along the 500-year floodplain or the 0.2% flood event, and we pick all the structures that fall within that floodplain. and then we measure their first floor elevation or the lowest elevation where the water might enter. And then we put all that in together with all of our information, and then we're able to calculate the value of those of that flood event. So if you had 10 structures that are worth $50,000, then it's not necessarily 100% loss, but depending on the flood event, and we do it for several, we do it for the 100-year all the way down to the 5-year, and then you're able to say, oh, this event that I just looked at the previous one, okay, that one's going to be the moderate level, this is what's going to flood, now I know how much damage is going to happen from that event. So it's just more information. We've got a lot of information to share with you guys, and it's especially during response so that you can sort of focus on which areas that as a community planner and response where to go. We also have a tool called the Elevation Finder, and Aaron loves this. It's a real low-key app, but at any point it takes all the LiDAR from the state, and you can plug in your address, and you can just get a rough idea of the ground elevation around your structure. And in this particular version, I was able to also overlay the floodplain map. You can just turn that on or off. And then you can also, this is called hillshade relief, because a lot of times people say, oh, I'm on a flat area, water's not going to drain, or where's it going to go? And this actually is showing you the hills and the valleys in your area that you might want to look at.
Kind of resolution, vertical?
Yes, it's a vertical elevation.
Yeah, what kind of vertical resolution do you get on that?
Well, it's the LiDAR, and there's more information on the left. I don't know the resolution, but it's whatever the latest statewide LiDAR elevation would be, and it gets updated whenever the LiDAR gets
It's pretty
updated.
accurate. I mean, it
Yeah,
goes
I'm
to
trying to
a
think, I
tenth of a
can't quite
foot.
read it.
It goes to a hundredth. It goes to a hundredth of a foot.
Too.
Oh, it's definitely to the 10th, if not.
I think it's the hundredth. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually it's a great tool for especially like Terraville, and I'll get into it too, but to see where water's going to go, because a lot of people think, oh, I'm up real high, or that's never going to get here, but you can see little valleys and little grooves and the natural flow of the land. It's a lot of fun.
So anyway, it's a tool that's available. Yes, go ahead.
Just a couple of quick questions. The other fellow that was just here and myself, we're county board members, and we just get crushed with questions about the dams. And, okay, we just took the dam out, and that's why we both came tonight, was to say, okay, the dams come out, how does that affect anything, if at all? What should we be anticipating? What's the consequences of that removal? How does that impact things? And then from the other side of the coin, I have an insurance agency, so we deal with NFIP, National Flood Insurance Plan. And they just retooled everything 2 years ago to the point where, you know, I'm 61 years old. I thought I knew it like the back of my hand. 2 years ago, yeah, forget about that.
It's completely different.
It's
yeah.
completely
NFIP
different.
has absolutely been completely rewritten.
And if you know about it,
That's my
they
job.
oversees the service department, and it's so difficult to get information now compared to what it was just a few years ago. You can barely understand what's going on, much less
Around the policies.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time figuring out what I need to ask, much less getting an answer. So with that, I'm always intrigued and curious, how does any of this tie into NFIP, meaning somebody in the room needed to buy flood insurance, or your bank or your lender said,
That's
hey,
the next
you need to
presentation.
buy it, so.
That's you. That's me.
Yeah.
So
So
they
right
tie
now,
them together.
Yeah, that's why we kind of separated these out, because we wanted to show kind of a big picture. What does DNR do? What are the services we have? And because we have a whole Office of Water Resources, my whole job is NFIP. I'm the state NFIP coordinator.
I love you.
You may or may not. Let's get to there are responsibilities with that, but we will go into that in a fair amount more depth.
Okay, and then will you touch on it all, the dam stuff? Because from our perspective, like, this was the first of many.
right.
Because now Elgin is going through the whole, oh, don't you dare touch our, and then St. Charles is the, I'm running on a platform of I'll save your dam. No, I want your dam down. Guys, we don't even know what taking ours did. I mean, I think it's really leveled off the water to the south of it. I don't know that for sure, but that's my gut feel, just observational.
So for the dam removal, that is part of our section that I work on, and most of the time when we do a dam removal project, we work with the community and we model it, we show there's lots of options. It's strictly from Office of Water Resources, it's about public safety. And these small we call them run-of-the-river dams, they really serve no purpose. And we do have several in the state that we lose lives every year because as the water goes over, it makes a scour hole and people get stuck in this vortex that happens. So from an OW, we don't like the dams. We don't want them. And if we own the dams, if the state of Illinois owns them, we are going to be working with each community to come up with a plan to address that safety, which is through removal, or you're gonna own the dam. So I'm just gonna warn you.
Was our dam your dam?
Yes, Carpentersville was, we owned the dam.
Okay.
So then we usually work with the community and then we look at different options. So that would have happened probably years ago. But because of this dam, there really were no other alternatives. And it was a fairly straightforward project to remove the dam. And I wasn't part of that project, so I could always reach out to the people involved with that. But generally, we model it, we look at it before. There's a lot of reasons to get rid of a dam, but it's also fish passage, you have ecosystem, you increase the wetlands, you get boaters, or at least canoeists, but you have the people that love the dam. They have their first kiss at the dam. They want to keep that dam forever, even though it serves no purpose. So you have a lot of controversy. But
does it affect the flooding, the modeling that you're seeing?
that's what I was going to say. In general, when you look at a dam after it's removed, when you look downstream of a dam, upstream is going to look just like that. And in fact, if anything, in my opinion, it reduces flood because now you've got more land and it's drier and you have a little bit more buffer. But everything impacts. So now you've removed your dam, the next dam downstream, they all work in conjunction in a river. But I don't know the actual impacts, but in general, we try to show both the before and after, but I don't know what they showed you guys.
I'll really try to play. We, I think, are unique in that our river has a lock mechanism
Right.
up north. Do other rivers, do every river have that, or are we just, because we seem to flood most when, hey, they're going to release to try and save to the north of us, but the unintended consequence is that, wow, it's way too much water for us to handle, and now our homes and businesses are taking on a little bit. Does everybody have the lock?
We have lock and dam system throughout the Illinois River, Mississippi,
Okay.
and Fox. So those are the major
Do you regulate
thoroughfares.
the volume of water that is allowed to pass through
And-
during the
Right. So-
seasonal releases?
Yeah, so there have been studies to show in the past of what levels that need to be released, and you work together. It's a balancing act, and so technically everyone gets together and you write a protocol or maybe just a plan of action, or they're called emergency operation plan. So if they release a lot of water, it's part of their emergency operation plan. And that's all been agreed to and discussed. So I don't know the answer to your upstream lock and dam, but I do know that that there's people aren't just randomly opening them to flood you guys. There's reasons and the impacts.
According to the December 2019 governor's study for the Fox River Flood Commission, there's very little, there's insignificant storage up in the chain of lakes to allow any sort of flood event, major flood event to be mitigated. So you're talking about a day or two of storage during a major flood event. And so
Is that a lot or little?
that's
Minuscule.
minuscule.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. insignificant. And, you know, that's the finding of that flood commission, and then the Algonquin and McHenry Dam locks are operating according to the procedure that I think was last updated in 2012, that it's mandated by state law. So
And-
they looked at taking out the dams in the Central Fox. Algonquin was removed pretty quickly because, if for no other reason, it mandated operations coordinated with locking dams up in Stratton.
Well, and just so, there's the Corps of Engineers is also studying the Fox River and the removal of the dams, and they're calling it the 519 plan. And several of the communities along the river have been communicated with. Federal funding, I'm not sure what's going to happen with that, but the idea was to study each one of those and maybe update some of the, now that we have removed some of the dams. So I don't know the status of that.
Communities are going to be expected this year.
Well, right, it
to
was.
sign-
It
sign
was
on to
that, but I don't know now what's going to happen
Oh,
with
yeah,
the
I
time
mean,
frame and things like
Who
that.
knows what?
Right. So, I mean, there's a lot going on. So you have the Corps of Engineers, you have the state of Illinois, and then you have your communities. And we're all trying to sort of work together and figure out the best plan for each community, because it's all different for each one. So there's no one size fits all. But back to the operation of the lock and dam, it's a balancing act between users, upstream users, boaters, and then their job is to try to help flood control, but it's not magic. You still you're gonna flood. If we get enough water, you're gonna flood somewhere, and it might feel like you're the only one, but I guarantee you're not the only area in the state that's flooding. But anyway, let me finish this and we can open it up to specific questions. We also have a pretty strong GIS program, and we're really trying to bring this into our flood surveillance and our projects that we're studying, and just try to georeference everything, just try to make sure everyone understands where things are located, where those areas of high flood potential are. We also do a lot of overlaying and trying to combine different maps with you might have some environmental criteria, you've got flooding, and then you want to overlay that with potential new development. And then you can look at all those GIS layers and sort of see where the maximum and optimal location for future construction or changes in your community. So it's just a really good, it's a good, I guess, tool in our back pocket when we work with communities. Some communities have a really good GIS program and some don't, so we're available to try to help if there's something we can do with our GIS program to assist. All right, so that's all during the flood. Those are different times you can reach out to us, or the tools that we have for you to use during the flood. But now we're going to go ahead and look at what kind of resources are out there after your flood. Erin's going to
I'm
talk
gonna
about
this
this.
later. It's just part of the slides.
But engineering studies, after you have an area, I told you can reach out, your community leaders can reach out to us to have a study be done, a model be updated. But these are all different things. After a flood, we've had different communities come to us and why did this event happen? Like why did they release all that water? Well, it's almost an after event study, and we ask all the questions, we find out what happened and why, and were there any mistakes made, troubleshooting, what can be done next time to prevent that. We also sometimes some communities flood so bad and it's so flat, not as much of an issue here, they don't know how to get rid of the water. The water just sits there for months and months. So we can come up with a way to help them figure out how to do water, how to pump that water out, come up with an engineering plan. And then we also just recently, we have some ability, because we have our survey crew, we can do some infrastructure analysis where that might be looking at your pipes, looking at trying to make a GIS map of your local sewer system. I'd say it's not necessarily something we work on a lot because it is not our area. EPA generally does stormwater, and then your local stormwater groups will manage your stormwater collection systems, but we're there to help if you're need additional assistance. So here's the contacts, Erin right here, NFIP, and she'll tell you more. We do have, if you had interest in a mitigation or mitigation planning, is Ron Davis. I'm the flood surveillance, and that I would be who you would reach out to if you have questions about what we have to offer for that program. We have dam safety, which is different than the lock and dam, but we do have a group within our agency that goes and inspects dams throughout the state, and also provides dam safety and emergency management if a dam was to breach and things like that. Permitting, as I mentioned, is a big part of the DNR. It's not in my area, but whenever you build in a floodplain, I'm sure most of people here, you have to get a permit from the state of Illinois. You are not allowed to build in a floodplain without it. So that is the group that you would, if in Northeast Illinois, that's our, is it Bartlett office? Mm-hmm. That's who you would reach out to, is Bill Boyd, and that's who you send your permits to, or you ask questions. And if you had any coastal management questions, you would reach out to Meg, and we do have our GIS specialist. And what I've learned, I'm an engineer, so I'm already nerdy, but GIS, talk to GIS. I do not talk. So we let the GIS people communicate directly.
Are these slides, Phil,
Yes.
will the village have these slides that we can,
Yeah.
instead of trying to take the screenshots and stuff, for sure?
Sure.
We'll have, tell me if I'm wrong, but as we discussed, we'll have PowerPoints up and we have a video of this as well, we'll do that.
Well,
Were they both
Thank you, guys.
open? Yeah.
That's me.
And again, I'll be here after. She's going to give her talk, and then we can ask any other specifics.
Because I usually make the motion program. All right, thank you, Tara. So thank you for going past my slides.
No, I just didn't.
Okay. So again, yeah, I'm Erin Conley. I'm the state floodplain coordinator. I say that generally. Technically, I'm also the state NFIP coordinator. I will tell you, since we have an insurance agent in the room, insurance is in my job title. It is not in my head. It's like the weakest area of my job is flood insurance. But we will talk about it tonight. So I'm just going to go. My program is, I work very closely with FEMA. I'm funded by a grant through FEMA, Region 5. So I'm going to be bringing in a lot of that federal component, that the FEMA mapping, flood insurance studies, and this is my basics. I will try my best not to acronym you. Don't hate, it happens. But we have a lot of them. Some of the biggest things we're going to be talking about, though, again, obviously FEMA, National Flood Insurance Program, Flood Insurance Rate Map. Again, it's got insurance in the title. That's not what it's about. Those are where you go to find out what your area, how your area has been mapped for flood hazards. It has a lot of information. Your area is fairly well studied up here, so your maps have a lot of detail and information in them, and I'll show you where you can get to those and some other stuff in here. So this is just what we're going to cover. I'm going to do basics of NFIP, go over the community's role. East Dundee is a participating community in the NFIP, which gives a lot of benefits to you as residents. And I like to really promote those benefits because it also brings a lot of responsibility and some uncomfortable conversations, which Tara briefly alluded to with that substantial damage slide. We're going to talk about substantial improvements, substantial damage. I'm going to go over some real basics of mapping with the floodplain mapping, the flood insurance studies, kind of information you can find there. If you want to dig more into that, I can stay, not tonight because we won't get home before tomorrow. But there's a lot of information about your community and about your rivers in that flood insurance study. We're going to talk about floodway, which is handled very differently than just a floodplain, and then just go over real briefly some insurance basics. So what is the NFIP? It's a voluntary program. We talk about FEMA a lot when we talk about NFIP, But NFIP, the federal government establishes bare bones criteria for what they expect for communities that participate, but it's a voluntary program. Communities have to opt into the program. You adopt an ordinance, you adopt a resolution, and you agree, the community itself agrees, we're going to enforce this ordinance, and in return, you get access to national flood insurance, different grants and disaster assistance, and again, obviously, these really good maps and studies. So I kind of did this backwards. The last point on this, one of the biggest criteria, joining means that the community must enforce the regulations that protect new development and prevent increased damages. All of this program, I mean, it's a regulatory program, right? But there is the whole goal of this is keep people from getting damaged, keep people from getting hurt, buildings from getting damaged, and improve a community's resilience and your ability to come back after a flood event. As Tara had that great slide, we love that slide. Illinois has the most inland floodplains in the country. We are a very, very wet state. And so when we talk about this program, we talk about that resiliency component. How do you spring back after the inevitable flood? And that's one of the main goals of NFIP. You can get lost in a lot of rules, but that's what all of these rules and kind of the painfulness is about, is making people safer, making your investment in your buildings and your communities meaningful and last longer. And I keep saying that because there is some pain to this too. So again, roles in the NFIP. Federal government provides maps and studies. The studies are the basis of the flood insurance reports. We have one person in Region 5, FEMA Region 5, who directly supports me. Right now she has Illinois and Ohio, so she's very busy. But the state, our obligation, our role in this, we maintain our conveyance and storage in the floodway through our own state floodway permitting program. We maintain compliance on state-owned properties. We actually have new state law, so we at DNR permit actions of our sister agencies now. They have to come to us for development in the floodplain. That's not actually accurate. We have one person assigned to the state who provides training, outreach assistance, and audits. That's me. But I like to drive, so. Local communities. Part of that adoption of the ordinance is the local community must designate one job title as the floodplain manager, and that floodplain manager has a lot of work. And I will tell you, that's why I asked you, you're my floodplain manager. Generally speaking, when I'm the person when I reach out to a community, I'm like, hey, city clerk, I'm here to introduce you to your other duties as assigned. Oh, and by the way, there's a lot. So I have to permit all development in the regulatory floodplain. And when I say all development, that's interior work and exterior. If your home is located in the mapped FEMA floodplain, you are, by local ordinance, required to get permits for all work that you do to improve the market value of your home inside and outside. I realize not everyone does that. I mean, I will be honest, but that is important, and you'll see when we get into some of the more meanings of that. Check to see permits are in the floodplain, issue permits. Any work in the mapped floodway, we tell people refer this to a PE because things get much more complicated in the floodway. You're in our Northeast 6 communities. Under our statewide regulations, because Illinois has higher standards for floodways, we even have an acceptable use determination for what can and cannot go in the floodway. You cannot put new buildings in the floodway, cannot put fences in the floodway. We recently had some people on the Fox River who had put a fence up to keep small children out of, like, just literally running into the river. It had to come down. It's not acceptable use. So we're very tight on how we regulate, especially this highly congested part of the state. I mean, we're from Springfield. We know where everyone in Illinois lives, right? I had to drive past everyone today. And then the final thing for the local community, well, on this slide, is inspecting, looking for violations. People, I really appreciate all of you coming out tonight to learn about this, because a lot of what we deal with are well-intentioned but uninformed people. Maybe you don't know you're in a floodplain, or you think it's just a shed. There are implications to that, and so it's really important that you as residents know, that your community knows. It's much better to ask the questions and have this conversation beforehand. Otherwise, it's me coming in, and we've done a Google Earth review, And I'm like, here's this structure, here's this fence, where's the permit for this? And the community's going, I didn't even know it was there. We can see a lot on Google Earth. So, issue violation notices and enforce the code. This is where I become less popular, the community officials become less popular. Telling someone no is not fun. Telling someone, sure you can, but it's gonna cost you more than you thought, is even less fun, I promise. Because we're dealing with buildings. Most state records, you've got a record retention time frame. Because we're dealing with something like buildings and with these longer, we expect our buildings to last longer than 10, 15 years. We'd like them to last a lot longer than that. Records for this program must be maintained permanently. There is no, you can go ahead and delete those. We don't care how you maintain them, but they must be maintained. So enforcing, and we're going to get into this, substantial improvement and substantial damage are two of the least popular functions of my program. Again, I'm really letting you know how unpopular I am. But we're looking to ensure that buildings, new buildings and substantially improved buildings are protected from flood risk, that new development doesn't increase risk to you, to others. Anytime someone builds in the floodplain, you're placing something there that will impact someone else. So how do we mitigate that? How do we ensure that it's the lowest impact possible? And then again, complying with all the rules. And we kind of talked, this is what Tara alluded to earlier. Substantial improvement, substantial damage. It's two sides of the same coin. One of the basic tenets of like an environmental regulatory program, things existed before the rules came around. A lot of people have homes, their businesses, their structures that were in the floodplain prior to these maps being drawn. You get to stay. Very few programs require, you're just going to have to come into compliance immediately. But the caveat to that is, when you've improved the fair market value of that structure, either improved it by 50% and or it's been damaged by 50% of that fair market value. At that point, when you've hit that, and that's a combination of the two, you could have improved by 10% and then you get a big flood followed by a tornado and it's 60% damage to the structure. Now, the house needs to be repaired in compliance with new development standards. And that is expensive, that is difficult, but it is a requirement. And the reason for that, the reason we don't want people to improve things and leave them in the floodplain unmitigated, is because let's say you've got a $100,000 house and you put $50,000 in the kitchen, which I know you can do. Now you've got a $150,000 home in the house, in the floodplain. Well, what happens when that gets flooded? You've got $150,000 worth of damage. Maybe you've only insured to $100,000, but you've left this additional value, equity in the home, and you've left it at increased risk. We're trying to make sure you can live in your house, you can improve your house, but at a certain point, now you need to reduce that risk because you keep investing in something that's at risk. And the same thing with damage. And we're not going to get into this too much. I'll talk about those later. So this is we're going to switch now into mapping basics. Again, I'm going to try to get you guys stay on track here, but largely our zone A's are our floodplains. We have a couple of different kinds of floodplains. You've got, everyone kind of thinks of rivers, riverine flooding, and that's our A, AE, A1 through 30. I don't think your maps have those anymore. But we also have shallow flood, shallow sheet flow, which is the AOs. It's not very common in Illinois, so don't worry about that. But the other kind of flooding that we have a fair amount in Illinois are our zone AH, which is just ponding, where you've got that depression in the land and it fills with water. Usually it's about 1 to 3 feet. They're marked in the maps. It's a little different, it's managed differently than riverine flooding because it's not the same dynamics, but they are regulated and they must be treated as a regulatory floodplain zone. Any building in that area must have a permit. And then everything else is is not subject to mandatory regulations until you get to the coastal areas. Lake Michigan has a coastal zone, and we have coastal zone maps for Lake Michigan. So that's based off of wave action instead of water flow. They're fairly new for us, but so we actually, when Tara was talking about our coastal management, we do have a coast, and it's mapped in using the same engineering analysis that they use on the ocean coast. So kind of cool. And this is a map. Sorry, I put in Juliet. I didn't update my pictures for you. But this is a nice picture because it has all of the different components that we have in a map. And I'm going to give you, there's the website up there. It's the FEMA National Flood Hazard Layer Viewer. It's ArcGIS tool. You can search by address. It's a pretty good map as far as federal maps go. So you've got the red and blue diagonal striping. That's our floodway. Again, that's the area with the highest amount of regulation in the state of Illinois. That is the area at all costs we do want to keep open. It must be available to convey those storm waters, the quantity and the speed of the water. And then you go out a little bit further, you see the blue zones, we call that flood fringe. Together, the fringe and the floodway, that is your floodplain, right? Flood fringe has more flexibility. You can do a little more in a flood fringe, but we do regulate it, and we do want to ensure that things aren't being placed there. They're going to create impacts and blockages that hurt other people. And then, okay, we've got kind of the tan color on the far right. That's our 0.2%. So all of these, we moved away from calling them the 100-year flood, right? The regulatory floodplain is based on the 100-year flood. We don't call it that because people will say, well, it's been 50 years, I've got another 50, I'm good. I'm gonna live here and I'll get insurance, the next fool can buy it. That's not how it works. It's actually a 1% every year chance of having that flood. I will tell you in southern Illinois, Metro East area, they've had 200-year floods in the last 3 years. So the 1% is a more accurate way of saying it, although a lot of people like that 100-year language. The 0.2% is what we also call the 500-year flood. They are more rare, but they're very impactful when they happen. And when you've got this, it's, again, we're talking about planning, we're talking about community development. It's not there are no regulatory requirements in the NFIP that you moderate development in that area. But are you being smart? Are you looking at good management? Yeah, you might want to modify it. These maps take a long time to develop. A lot of them are based on much older rain data. We have new rain data that's showing increases. Our part of the country, we are looking to get more wet. So when you're talking about how do we reasonably plan moving forward, that 500-year, that 0.2% floodplain is also an area that should be examined. You should be aware of it. Don't put something critical in there. We have a community that will remain unnamed in Illinois that put their fire station police department into the floodplain, below the base flood elevation. It's going to get flooded out all day long. They actually got kicked out of the program for that because they refused to listen. They went ahead and put this massive critical infrastructure at risk. They no longer have access to flood insurance, NFIP flood insurance, or disaster assistance when they flood. So I included this slide because the NFHL has a number of different layers that you have to go in and turn on and turn off. But there's a lot of information in those layers, and I'll get into this a little later. The LOMR, the LOMRs and LOMAs, those are letters. Those are different kinds of letter of map amendment and map revision. You may be in an area you're like, I really don't think I'm going to flood. I'd like to maybe get taken out of that mandatory flood insurance purchase requirement. LOMAs are one way you can do that. And I direct people to say, hey, turn this layer on, see if anyone else in your neighborhood's gotten one. I also use the Elevation Finder website because we can see how high are you actually, what is that base flood elevation for your area. Were you built on fill? Because if you're built on fill, you don't get the free LOMA. You've got to go through a more complicated and more expensive letter of map revision. But it's good to see. It's good to see what other people have gotten around you, and because these maps aren't perfect. Yeah, go ahead.
I think there's always confusion with these LOMAs as to who you're supposed to be contacting to do this.
It is a very specific process. You go through FEMA for the letter of map amendment process.
And I get that, but
Yeah.
who are you hiring to do that for?
Ah.
A civil engineer?
Yeah.
A standard engineer? Who's the guy? I got a guy. Who's the guy?
We have a lot of guys.
Yeah.
I will tell you, a letter of map amendment should not require, generally speaking, should not require you to deal with an environmental consulting firm. Generally speaking, it's an engineer. You're going to need, if you're getting a letter of map revision because you've revised the floodplain, if you're bringing in fill and you want to get out of the floodplain based on fill, you're going to want to be working with an engineering company. Letters of map amendment, because they're so basic, what you're saying is, I got mapped in wrong. I am on naturally high ground. I've done no fill, and my lowest floor of my home, which is not the lowest floor you live on, but the lowest floor of your home, so like your basement. If you have a basement, that's your lowest floor, is still above that base flood elevation. For FEMA's purposes, you just have to be above the base flood elevation. I will tell you, the Elevation Finder website, that's a lot of conversations I have with homeowners, because they'll call and be like, I'm not going to flood. I want a letter of map amendment. And I go to that Elevation Finder website and I'll say, hey, ground around you looks to be about at base flood elevation. Do you have a basement? No, I don't have a basement. You might want to try it. You might want to put in for this. It's easier if there is an elevation already established. Not all floodplains have base flood elevations established for them. Those are our unnumbered A zones. And that's where you might need to pull in someone to give you some consultant to establish that base flood elevation. There's a lot of freely available information too, though. So like I will direct people to county highways and county road commissioners or the state DOT, or come to us. If work has been done on an unnumbered zone A floodplain, and this is where it gets complicated. In Illinois, we consider that all to be floodway then, and that work needs to come to us for a permit. And when they work, like when IDOT works on a bridge, or the county department, roads department works on a county bridge, if it doesn't have a base flood elevation, they need to come to DNR for a permit, and they must establish a base flood elevation at that location. That's part of the engineering analysis that goes into that bridge work. So then, that's there.
It's so muddy.
Yes.
When Jody down in Kane County for us, who's absolutely wonderful, but you have the residents calling saying, you know what, well, my property's in the floodplain. My house isn't, not even a corner of it. And then you try and respond and say, yes, but your basement is still within that area and sits below. And I think there's like, who's the referee? Where do you start? Hello.
Yep, I am the referee.
Okay.
I'm the referee. I'm the inspirational coach. I am the cop who comes in. It's a lot of fun. I get to change my tone of voice a lot during the day. In a situation like that, let's say, I don't have a pointer. If they're in the blue and they're like, no, I'm out, I'm on higher ground. No, you're mapped into the floodplain. So yes, you're in the floodplain. Now, do you think you're on naturally higher ground? Let's look at the LIDAR. Let's look at what and again, this is not, you don't use the map elevations. You have to go into the flood insurance study to get an actual base flood elevation. And that's what, you can call me, I can work through that. That is a more complicated process, and I don't generally do that like just on the phone. I give more rough analysis and direction on where people can go. And there are times when I tell people, I'm like, I wouldn't go for a LOMA. I would absolutely keep insurance. You may think you're high, but I can see that you're pretty low, and there's a ditch that runs right behind you. If every other stream gets loaded up, that ditch is going to load, and you're going to have damage to your property. So, yeah, I do a lot of that. But the maps aren't perfect. I will never say they're perfect. There's a lot of work that goes into them. It takes a long time. And even getting them adopted can take a couple of years. So there's study, and then there's development, and then there's outreach, and then there's the adoption phase. Well, that rain data that map was based on came before the study. So, the waters can be higher. The study that went into this may not have been as detailed. That's why we have an amendment process too. So just for your awareness, always you do have to turn on the LOMA layer. That's kind of what this is also saying. Use that LOMA layer, because if, again, and I'm going to say, pretend like there are no elevations, although I can tell you there are elevations in this panel that I'm showing. If there are no elevations, your neighbor may have done something, or someone down the street may have gotten a letter of map amendment, and they've established a base flood elevation, and then you can also use that. That's best available data. And so we encourage people to use that. Bridge work especially because in Illinois we have such a tight restriction on and a very broad definition of our floodway. Bridge work technically, very frequently, will have a base flood elevation established in those unnumbered areas. So contact me, and I'll get you to whoever the right person is that we need to get you to. And then this is just an example. This is a letter of map amendment. I will caution you, if you're going to look to see, hey, what's been amended near me, look to make sure it's a removal. Because not all LOMAs, if you look at the, I don't remember how to go back, but they're all marked in purple on the map. They're not all removals. Some of them can be denials, which is what this looks like. It's still on the map. Someone submitted that request. But you can't always assume that the purples mean yes, they're out. Sometimes the purple means, oh no, we disagreed with your data. You were wrong, buy insurance. And you can get all of that information from those from FEMA's website. Where are we going here? Okay, here we go. And the determination document will say non-removal, and it'll tell you these will tell you what is removed, what's not removed. Is it meets and bounds? Do we actually have an address? Do we have a specific structure? All of that information is contained in these, and they're absolutely publicly available. So, looking beyond the firm. Firm, again, is your flood insurance rate map. I try not to say that one too often. Firms, we call them D firms if they're digital. Some communities still have paper, and that's the worst. Peoria County's still on paper, St. Clair, Madison, Monroe. Lots of people down there, and they don't have this searchability. So again, there's our numbers on how this happens. The flood insurance study, the FIS, that's where all the data is. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of work that goes into developing those flood insurance studies. You can find out a lot about your community and your potential flood risk and what sort of analysis was done. All of that's in there. Yeah.
Is there any, I look at the third year, if your house is 122 years old and it's never flooded ever, I mean.
Go to Vegas. You need to play games of luck.
It's never. I'm not, yeah, we do.
I mean, and it may be, so there's two things. You may need to go to Vegas and win yourself some good money because you're a very lucky person. Or it may be that you were mapped in inappropriately. And if that happened, that's where, again, look at the DNR elevation finder. Did someone bring in fill initially? If they did, well then we may have a different kind of removal process from the floodplain. But you can still remove if you've been elevated based on fill. That is a more expensive one. The LOMA is free. LOMA's like, no, we were just naturally, and you may be naturally just on higher ground.
Oh, I didn't know if that would have, I would think it would have, I mean,
Yeah.
hello, we've been paying flood insurance for, you know.
And like I said,
And I know, we'll get rid of it and then we'll fucking flood, sorry. I mean, that's yeah.
those two words go together more often than you think. Yes. So, yeah, some of these studies are older. 1970s, again, Peoria, Illinois, with the Illinois River going right through it. I think their study is from the very early 80s. Things have changed. Engineering methods have gotten better. We do better analysis. We can model better. Those are not great maps. So you want to look at those flood insurance studies. If you really want to get nerdy and you've got time and you want to get into the background of your community. It has lots of different elevations. But yeah, all of this is just kind of different considerations. Do you have ice jams? Ice jams are unpredictable in some ways in how that water is going to flood. And it's a different kind of flooding. It's not that standard, you know, the snows are melting, the rains are falling, and the river's going up. So those are things, if you live near a river and again, you should be aware of and concerned about ice jam flooding. Last year wasn't great. Will County got hit a little harder than you did, but Will County got hit and they had a fair amount of damage. Sedimentation, vegetation, debris can all alter the stream of your path, the course of your stream. It can all add impacts of flooding too. I mean, we know that if things get filled in, not everyone cleans out their streams. So that's you want to not just rely on that flood insurance rate map. They're good. They're very good, but they're not perfect, like all of us. So I've mentioned this a couple of times. We've talked about the floodway. I've talked about flood fringe. So what is the floodway? In Illinois, the floodway is that portion of the river that when you apply a surcharge and apply development pressures on the edges of it, the space of that river that's required to convey floodwater so that there is a rise of no more than 1/10 of a foot. In Illinois, we do 1/10 of a foot, and that the velocity of that river doesn't go up by any more than 10%. That's our floodway. That's where we are most concerned with keeping this open because of all the development pressures in the northeast 6 counties of Illinois. We are very aggressive, not aggressive, we're very protective in Illinois of your floodway, and we do not allow things to go into the floodway. It's very, very restrictive because we have so much more development up here, and we know what impacts the floodway impacts a lot of people. Flood fringe is that area, so the flood fringe is the A to B, or sorry, A to C and the D to B. That's our flood fringe, but what we do is you simulate this. How much can we fill this in until, and in Illinois we define it as, again, 1/10 of a foot rise. FEMA's bare minimum standards for NFIP allows for 1 foot rise in a flood before you define your floodway. We in Illinois take a much more conservative approach to that. It is essentially a no rise. It's a modeled no rise. We don't want that going up. So this is our floodway. And this is what happens when you illegally fill in the floodway. We see this, we have communities. I'm dealing with, again, put the cop hat on, people who put warehouses in the floodway. And that has repercussions for the entire community. You are allowed to do some fill in flood fringe and floodway. I say that with a caveat. In Illinois, in this part of the state, you're not. We don't allow fill. In the rest of the state, sure, you can fill in the floodway. You must first get a conditional letter of map revision from FEMA, where FEMA reviews your fill and determines that you're not going to cause an impact. And then once you've finished that, they have to do a letter of map revision. It's a very expensive and complicated process. Don't fill in the floodway. And naturally you can't, because the state won't let you. So, all of that, it's on my mapping basics. Now to the insurance. And I will not be as good as an insurance agent on this, I promise you. But I will tell you, anybody in East Dundee can get flood insurance. And I'm going to exclude last year's Cook County disaster because that would totally skew these numbers. But we say at least 40% of NFIP claims in this part of the country and in Illinois come from outside of the map floodplain. Outside of the map floodplain. It's not you're out and so you're safe. We see this. Now I will tell you, last year in Cook County, probably 95% of the Cook County flooding was entirely unmapped floodplain. That's why I don't include those in my numbers, because it skews it too much. I don't want to scare everybody. But yeah, you can get an NFIP policy anywhere. Renters, if anyone here is a landlord and you've got a house in the floodplain, let your tenants know. Renters can get flood insurance for contents only. And that's a huge thing, because especially if you're renting a property and that's all you've got is the stuff inside it, that's a huge loss to incur. So renters can get renters only policies. Again, if you're in the map floodplain for federally backed loan mortgages or loan mortgage tools, you have to have insurance. And I will tell you, I get more and more calls from people who are realtors and people who are just about to close, and they're like, bank says I need flood insurance. I'm not in the floodplain. Yeah, that's the bank's choice, right? The bank is giving you their money for you to make an investment. They want a return on their investment. They want to make sure it doesn't get damaged. A lot of banks have been using a more conservative flood analysis tool to establish what they consider to be the flood risk zones. And they will, if you want our mortgage, you will get the insurance that we require from you. So I'm seeing that more and more frequently these days. A lot of, I think some of the more conservative tools, and they're outside kind of consulting firms, First Street is one of them. I think they look to that 0.2% floodplain and consider that to be all floodplain and with an increased risk. So, yeah, even if you think you're out, your bank may still keep you in.
Is that the only flood insurance that's available?
No. So you can get private flood insurance. And I know people have said it's, less expensive. Generally speaking, when someone comes to me and says, I found a flood insurance policy, it's like half the price of NFIP. So I'm just gonna go with that. I say,
Maybe a
yeah,
SUV or something.
check with your bank. Yeah, because NFIP insurance has, it's fairly good coverage, although I'm sorry about I will get you the name of my Region 5 flood insurance contact. Do you know James Sink? I feel like everyone should know James Sink. He's fabulous. He's a great guy, and he knows more about NFIP insurance than I will know. I always refer those more detailed questions to him. I'm sorry, did I answer all your questions?
Good.
Okay, we're good.
Well, I got a question on the flood insurance.
Sure.
I have some stuff along the river, and I had an insurance company drop the ball on insurance, and it lapsed by like 2 days, and now I'm on risk 2.0.
Yep.
So I got an 800 square foot house.
And you just went way up because your statutory glide was taken away from you, and now you're paying that full actuarial rate.
Yeah,
Yep.
so the home insurance is like $800 a year.
Mhm.
Flood insurance was $1,400, and now it's up to $3,200
Holy cow.
for a house that's been under 20 years not flood.
Well, so you may want to look. There are a couple of things you can do for that, and I'll just kind of get into some of the differences. And I think, let me see here. Let's just get past this. If you're doing a federally secured loan in the floodplain, you must get flood insurance. I can get to this, but just so you can look at it. But so there are a couple of things that are different about flood insurance now under the risk rating 2.0. First of all, it used to be you had to have an elevation certificate, which is something that generally was done by a surveyor that comes out. They do first floor heights. They establish they give you a base flood elevation. And I can show you some of they go through all of these different things. An elevation certificate was required for you to get flood insurance because that was what they based your risk on.
Mm-hmm.
They took that away. That said, you can do an elevation certificate, and you can do for
Yeah.
insurance purposes only.
I've got them.
Okay,
Didn't know.
then you have a risky location. That's what they're saying.
So what I'd like to do is mortgage is down far enough
Hmm.
that it makes sense just to pay it off or get a line of credit, use that because they don't require flood insurance on a line of credit.
Sure, you can do that. You can reduce your premium so that it only covers the amount of the loan that you have out.
But then your flood insurance has to match the homeowner's insurance for coverage amounts.
Really?
So if I have,
Because it can't. NFIP policies can't match. There's a limit to how much NFIP policies can cover.
up to 500,000.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
So this,
And this house isn't going to hit that at all.
no, so,
Okay.
yeah, so
Yeah.
then if the mortgage is down now to under 100,000, we have to have it insured for whatever State Farm wants at 200.
Right.
You can't have flood insurance down at 80,000 coverage in the home at 200.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get out, well, I can give you my card.
He won't get out, or he won't get out.
So what my question was.
I mean, if you want to get out of paying for it, yeah, you have to own the house
Walk by
outright.
tomorrow. You put it right in the aggregator for the private programs through the NFIP programs.
Yeah, we've got to do something
Yeah,
there.
seriously.
So the question I had was, if I paid off that mortgage through the whole line of credit, we're
Mhm.
doing it. If somebody else were to come in and get one flood insurance going on, I guess it's not grandfathered under any kind of rates anymore.
No, and so you raise a really good point, and this is something I wanted to mention because you're in here too. One of the best ways to keep flood insurance down is that continuity of coverage.
Yeah.
And I'm really sorry, yeah. I mean, they're good, I guess, at that. If you have a break of 2 days,
It wouldn't budget on anything.
that's difficult. I will tell you, so when people are buying homes in the floodplain, again, I get a lot of these calls, I have to have flood insurance, where's my elevation certificate? We do not maintain those in my office. What I do tell people at closing is, ask the person who's selling this house to you to write their policy over to you.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no break-in coverage, and you're still on, it's a statutory glide, they call it, to
Yeah.
that full rate. But that keeps you, like, let's say you've been paying the $1,400 here, and maybe you're at $1,800 on that statutory, but you're going to get up to $22.
Yeah.
They just turning it over. Now, when you sell your house, sure, you can turn that policy over. Probably it's not going to save them a whole lot of money. But if you buy another house in the floodplain that's already insured,
Mhm.
ask them to write the policy over to you.
Yeah, that, they took care of that part.
Okay.
It was just they had the mailing address for the policy to go to 105 West Main
Oh, jeez.
instead of 104.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I find out from the mortgage company, Baker calls up one day, he's like, hey, why didn't you pay your flood insurance? And it's like, that one's not up, and then you go and track it down, and it's
I'm sorry,
back by
yeah.
a couple days, and then like they just don't care at all. They're pretty ruthless with it.
I mean, you know how insurance agents are.
So,
Let alone the companies.
Is there a way that I could pay it off, just have the coverage at the house at like a super low amount? So that
If your
the
home is no
insurance
longer
runs-
backed by a federally backed, if your home is no longer subject to a federally backed mortgage, you are not mandated to have flood insurance, and then you could lower how much you have. I will tell you, your neighbors may not like you because that may be the exact day before the river rises and everyone gets flooded. So, you know, I don't know your location, but I would just say, yes, you can do that. Once you're out, you don't have to have flood insurance because that mortgage tool has been satisfied.
So well, the real question is, how low can I go and still be within the you know?
Damages can build up very quickly. And again, without you, I'll give you my card because we may need to look at this. I will tell you, we have what we call a cheat sheet that I send to communities after a flood event, and it's part of that substantial damage assessment. Because we don't want people going, we don't want you going in someone's house. Someone's had flood damage, they're already stressed, they're cleaning stuff out. But we have a cheat sheet. If that water has been 2 inches above your first floor level, I can tell you your flooring is 100% damaged. Has to go. I don't remember all these off the top of my head, but like at 4 inches, now we're looking at your cupboards and counters. It gets very expensive very quickly. Drywall just channels that water up, and if you don't get it cut out very quickly, you can have complete replacement of drywall. So it can get very expensive very quickly, and that's why we want you guys to go out and do those inspections very, very quickly, because we also want to make sure someone doesn't come in, tear everything out, and then refix a home that's been substantially damaged. But I'll give you my card.
Okay.
I am on the road tomorrow to East St. Louis,
Okay.
but I'll be in on Monday.
Okay.
Okay?
One of the difficult things is, in my opinion,
Yeah.
the replacement cost computation that a State Farm or American Family, or whoever, Liberty might do,
Right.
compared to the replacement cost computation that an FIP does,
Right.
are not apples to apples. So State Farm may tell you your home's a $300,000 rebuild,
Yeah.
but the modeling on FIP might say it's $180,000 rebuild. And then, so you ask, where do you need to be? Within 80%. 80% of what? 80% of the fire policy rebuild, or 80% of the NFIP policy rebuild? And to me, there's always just that little bit of gray that you're going.
And this is where I bring James. This is where James Sink needs to be here. If I could just carry him with me.
No, too, that if you go in for the permit for improvement, they want 50% of the value. They carve out just the house.
Yes, it's not the land because we're only looking at your structure.
But somehow the valuation that they put on the land is insane. Whereas if
In this
it's
part of the state it
$200,000
is,
house,
yeah.
And then they're gonna say, well, you paid $200,000 for the house, but only $100,000 is for the actual house, $100,000 is for the land.
Okay, I will. Yeah. I don't see a whole lot like that are quite that high, but it may depend on the land. But I feel like you've gone through the substantial damage process.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got to-
Most audiences don't get that into those details with me. I will tell you, so for substantial damage, just real quick, because what he's talking about here is we look at, and this is when the community gets to be the heavy. We're currently, in East St. Louis, we're doing a 40-home buyout. We have 2 entire blocks that were deemed to be substantially damaged. And when you get to that point, it's not the cost of what you want to repair, it's the cost to repair that home to the state it was before it was damaged. So your fair market value is not based on a damaged market value, it's based on a pre-damaged market value. And you can't just say, well, no, I'm just going to put in the drywall, I'm not going to do nice tile, I'm going to, no, it's what does it cost to get it back to where it was beforehand? Because that's the structure you invested in, and that gets very complicated. But yes, so one of the things I tell communities, my hint on that is, we want to be as fair and impartial about this as possible. So for a community, I say look to the tax assessor, which is another third party that generally has no role in floodplain management. That's what your property taxes are based on. I will say we had one incident where a person was saying, no, this is a $500,000 home, and they lived in the unincorporated county, and the county floodplain manager said, oh, cool, since we're using that for your damage assessment, I'll make sure to let the tax assessor know too, because those guys do talk to each other. It was not a $500,000 home either, but you look to that, establish that fair market value. There's a multiplier in there. I do 1 hour to 2 hour trainings on substantial damage. I could do a lot longer than that. But let's just say it does get complicated, and it is painful. We had conversations with people whose homes were deemed to be substantially damaged, and we said, you can't go in and just fix it. And especially after a larger scale flood event, you get a lot of well-intentioned people. The Red Cross comes out, we get religious organizations come out, and they want to get you back into your home. And that's important, but also, don't get back so quickly that you're going into a home that now needs more work than what you're originally intending. Give your community time to go through and do this assessment, because it's important. And part of that importance, again, is getting back to that first point, which is we're trying to protect you, we're protecting your big investment, and we're giving your entire community the ability to be resilient after a flood event. Because the fewer people you have to go into and help clean out their basements and clean out all the carpeting, and then everyone's got the piles for the garbage trucks to come. The fewer times we have that, if we can reduce that, your community is stronger. I have this in here because a lot of people think that NFIP policies don't cover basements, or they cover everything in a basement. Neither is true. There is limited coverage for basement. It's for those large kind of structural components of your home, the foundation walls, anchoring systems, furnace, water heater, heat pumps, sump pumps. One thing that people get really confused by is that your washer and dryer is not covered. I always say, oh, it's these large connections. Like, I am largely connected to my washing machine. I put a lot of money into this. It costs more than my furnace. They're still not, they can be unplugged and moved out. They're just a different kind of appliance. They're not allowed. Contents, yeah.
Well, what you can do is there's a flood in your area, and you collect all of your neighbors' appliances that got ruined.
Put them in your basement.
Yeah. I got air compressors, vacuum.
I am not going to endorse or condone anything there.
But it works.
It might.
Yeah.
So I just want to real quickly, what is an insurable property? Because we've got all sorts of weird things. 2 or more rigid walls and a fully secured roof. So if you've got a covered gazebo with 2 walls in your backyard, you can insure that. The biggest things, it has to be permanently fixed to site and 51% above ground. Underground homes are not covered, are not eligible for NFIP insurance. I mean, at a certain point, you got to throw your hands up and say, that's going to get wet. Or build those somewhere where it's not going to get wet. Manufactured homes can be covered. Manufactured homes are someone's home. They must be installed correctly. And I've got, again, probably a 30-minute presentation on just manufactured homes and RVs. But they can be covered. This is something that's very interesting because, and again, I'm talking in front of an insurance agent, so I get a little squeamish here, but the flood is not that presidential flood or even that low-level, moderate, kind of spring flooding, ice jam flooding that we're accustomed to. An NFIP insurable claim can be paid out with very specific circumstances here. It's surface water that covers more than one property, so 2 or more properties, comes over land into your home. What I learned, and I didn't realize this again until I talked to James Sink, that could be a fire hydrant that blows in front of your house, because that's water from city's easement, which is one property, coming onto your property. Surface water, it's not coming from your sewers or your pipes, comes over the house, and then if that causes damage to your home, that's a flood damage. The policies are good when they pay out. They do pay out faster than, generally speaking, from my experience, they do pay out faster than most insurance policies, and they cannot be canceled. You can never have your flood insurance policy canceled through NFIP. It can only be raised after more than one event, a qualifying event, and NFIP policies have a 10-year rolling window. So let's say it's 2025 and you get some ice jam flooding and you file a claim in 2025. And then you don't have another claim until 2020, or 2036. That now becomes your first claim, and that first claim, because first claims don't count, doesn't count. It cannot affect your rate. So it's a nice thing. Again, I hate to talk bad about insurance policies in front of an insurance person, but I mean, we're seeing insurance companies leaving portions of the state, of the country, not the state of Illinois. You hear on the news, California, Florida, it's very difficult and extraordinarily expensive to get insurance policies. These NFIP policies there's a statutory cap on how high they can go. There's a federal statutory cap on how much they can rise each year. And they can't be canceled. They can't drop you. They will be here. I was just watching, it was a presentation on climate resiliency and some migration patterns that we're expecting. And there was a woman who was being interviewed, and she gave up on her home in Florida when her insurance policy went from $20,000 a year to $30,000 a year. That was her breaking point. She moved to Indiana, where she's paying fractions of that. So they are good policies. They cannot be canceled. Here we go. Yeah, here's how much is it required. If you've already got it, I won't go over this. As we mentioned earlier, 2.2 or 2.0 changed everything. The pre-firm discounts, and that may have been part of what came into with your house if it's an older home. It was there, that pre-firm, it was there before the map. We no longer care. The maps are around. Homes are assessed. Again, not the in or out. I left this caps. I didn't actually make this slide. My prior coworker did. And I know it looks like I'm yelling at you, but it's because that transferring policies from home seller to home buyer is a really critical way that you can reduce that statutory glide on the person who's buying the house. And as we've already heard, continuous coverage will keep your costs down. Lots of different variables that go into this. I'm not going to go into all of them. And then this is one of the, with risk rating 2.0, they look at your foundation type, they look at your home type. These are the essential types of homes that everyone kind of fits under, with some variations in there. These are also included on elevation certificates. You just pick what kind of home style you have, and then they give you elevations and lowest walls from that. Prior claims history, again, that first claim is your freebie. It doesn't count. If you have a flood in 2025 and a flood in 2027, now you've had a claim, and that second claim within that 10-year window, things are going to go up. You will have a increase. There are things you can do. You can elevate your machinery, elevate your HVAC systems, all those things that are so expensive to replace. I like in Illinois, when I see people who put their air conditioners outside on the ground, I'm just like, I live in Springfield. I have no map floodplain anywhere near my house, and I have a 1-foot riser for my air conditioner unit outside for our whole house unit. Just because you can get a lot of rain and it can pond, and now I also just bought a new HVAC system, and very expensive. Get it off the ground. They look at levee protection. You guys don't have that around here, so I'm not going to get into it. And then the community rating system is another tool. Are you a CRS community? Okay.
We recently had a conversation with FEMA about CRS.
Okay.
Moving in that direction.
So, and I'm going to go real quickly over that because it can bring you big benefits. Partially because of the higher standards that Illinois has, and inherent, when we have a model ordinance that communities adopt, and we just shoved a bunch of higher standards in there. So that most communities have a freeboard elevation for new construction. There are higher standards inherent, and because of how we handle our floodways. You can get to a class 9 without trying very hard at all. The higher you go you go from a class 10 as everybody. If your community enrolls in the CRS program, that you can get 5% reduction by every rate level you go up. So really it could be fairly easy for East Dundee to get a 5, 10 to 15% reduction in your insurance rates and insurance premiums by enrolling in CRS. there are caveats to that. It does require more work from the community, and you have to go through a full audit with me. FEMA has been saying that they want to do them, but I also do these full audits. It's a full-scale development review. It takes a while. You have to have no violations. But if your community meets that standard and then commits to doing increased, outreach activities, increased protections to the community, you can get reductions in insurance for everyone in the community. It's a blanket discount rate that's applied to everyone. It does require work from you. It takes a little bit to get into that process. But if you're interested in it, I can connect you with the CRS, the Illinois CRS Community Specialist, and we can talk about scheduling an audit. Because, again, I get to put on all my hats. And that's it. That's me. I can give you a card if you don't want to take this, or they'll be sent out. The slides will be sent out. That's my email, too. Like I said, I'm the only person for the state of Illinois right now. We do have a vacancy that's posted as of yesterday for the Northeast Illinois coordinator in the Bartlett office. They can travel. If you know anyone who's interested, is already a certified floodplain manager and wants to join me, I'm desperate. It's a big state. But that said, okay, we did try to get in so we'd have an hour for questions. That's not going to happen, but we've been answering. So, do you have any more questions for us? Yeah.
Roughly, what's your capital budget?
Oh, for my program?
Yeah.
Just for my program is, it's a little complicated. It's about $500,000, but that's because I'm under a FEMA grant. There's a state match that's required for that. We're about a 60-40 match in Illinois. And part of what I use my grant for is I help fund some of the survey work that goes into the SAFER website, the SAFER program. I fund, we have a bunch of different activities. So
what about for other capital improvements? What roughly?
I have no idea.
No.
she doesn't have to manage a grant.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends. We have an engineering section that does construction and design, and then those projects have capital funding. Sometimes it's appropriations from different legislation. Sometimes, there's no.
And then do you see federal grants sometimes for projects, or do you get into that at all?
You do more like cost sharing. So sometimes, for example, the Corman offers to do a project for a community, and they'll pay 40%. And then you get a match from the community. Sometimes the state can do some of that match. So it's not.
It's Silver Jackets, like the SAFER website. Tara mentioned Silver Jackets. Silver Jackets is a cooperative program where we work with the Army Corps. We have a lot of partners. I work very closely with FEMA and IEMA, all the time. There are a lot of grant programs out there. Generally speaking, they tend to go to the community first. So they'll go FEMA, IEMA, community. Tara mentioned our mitigation program. So we do have a DNR. We have our own home buyout program. It is very restrictive. We will buy out damaged homes. We pay a fair market value price for those. And we pay the community. It's a grant with the community. The community applies for it. That availability is based on what's been allocated to us. But because it's funded through bond funds, there has to be a property, a structure on there that we're buying. So we don't do mobile homes because we don't actually count those for that program as a structure. So there has to be a home. It has to be bought out. We pay for everything. The title search is 100% grant, and then that land has to stay open. But it can be used. We were talking before the meeting about green infrastructure grant opportunities, which is a grant through EPA where communities do green infrastructure to do stormwater management. And you can use that buyout property as part of your green infrastructure management. In terms of budgets, the last for our buyout program, we are finishing off 2 years of allocation, which was $10 million. And that's another thing that we use. So currently Illinois has three active presidential disaster declarations, 2 that are more directly related to flood events. The first one was in St. Clair County, and IEMA dedicated all of those hazard mitigation grant funds to the county that was really underwater. But the second one, where Cook was included, Springfield was in the second recent result. Okay, The second one had Cook, Sangamon County was in there, we had the derecho, and we got, I don't remember what the final amount was, but after there's been a presidential disaster declaration, you get individual assistance or public assistance. Public assistance goes directly to the government officials, like if there's been, you had to hire a lot, you had to keep your police on duty 24 hours and all the overtime. You can get payback for some of that. Individual assistance goes to residents, and then after that, FEMA takes a portion of the total amount that was dispersed during that declaration event, and that goes into hazard mitigation grants. And we have 2 of those, and you should see, do you guys get my emails? Okay. So when IEMA establishes the criteria for the next the hazard mitigation grants, I'll put that out to you through my email list too, and that makes a lot of money available. It is competitive, throughout the state of Illinois, because I think they're going to let the next 2 go to pretty much anyone in the state of Illinois. But that's another grant opportunity, and what they want you to do with those is identify projects that can reduce primarily hazards, but we like to encourage flood reduction because.
When do you think that grant process will open again?
So we've got 2. And I just talked to IEMA, we were talking about it this morning, and they are preparing the NOFO soon. And we do expect that those funds will be dispersed because they were already allocated months ago. So again, they've been committed, we know they should be there, and we're hopeful and expecting that they'll be available for hazard mitigation grants.
And you're thinking this year, like?
I'm hoping within the next month or 2, we'll be able to put that word out to you with what the expectations are. And again, when I say we, that's a global we. That's IEMA. I don't give any money out.
When you're asking about budgets and things, we're here representing Osborne Resources and DNR, but there are other programs and other agencies. So I would just mention, you said you might want to have future talks, or the goal here is to build your resiliency from what we were told, and we're just one piece of that. What she's been mentioning, so you have the Corps of Engineers, they have ways to help provide technical assistance like we do, and they do have some fund matching, because it's a federal agency, so either your local community has to do some matching funds, but those are all spelled out, and they have some good programs too. Then the IEMA, but then EPA has the green infrastructure. You're talking about building some a green area, wetland plants or
native plants. Yeah.
So those kinds of grants are available, but those come from EPA. So it is a little bit challenging to know who to go to where, and we're here just to tell you what we offer. But there are other resources out there.
And there are a lot of resources, yeah.
So I got a question then. Last time I was at one of these meetings, Cody was here talking about doing some annexation of the property. And it's a couple hundred acres, the whole quarry. And they said that their stormwater management
It's
plan
really nice to meet you. Thank you.
filters all the way down, across the street to McGraw Wildlife, which is a huge nature wildlife preserve, and they got all the ponds and everything there. That then overflows, it goes down a pretty wide creek, but then it gets down to the neighborhood where his mother-in-law is.
It's upstream from a lot of
This is
houses.
one you were
It
talking
almost
about.
drew like a 20-inch culvert there.
See, and now that would be, so that's something that, let's say as a community, you've looked at this and you're like, we think maybe if we upsize that culvert. So you can't just say we want to replace it, but let's say you want to upsize it or you want to modify some of that channelization that's gone on there. Again, probably engineering studies is one option to help study that, or you can have an engineering firm or someone do that for you. But that is a hazard mitigation project. So upsizing, reducing risk. It can't be. I will tell you the one thing that we always tell this to everybody: never say deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance is not allowed to be covered. Like you can't just replace our pump because it got old in your pump station. But if you're seeing an increased need for more capacity, these are the kinds of that is the kind of project that
what
really.
You're talking about, the watershed is unbelievably big,
right?
And it comes down to 212.
And it gets pinched. Yep. So that is an example of a project that may very well be something that you want to consider looking into grant funding for, because they're expensive. A project like that for a small community is expensive. But there are hazard mitigation, and that's the whole focus of it. Get rid of your hazards before they impact people. So it's possible. I mean, we try to provide technical review on these, but it is an IEMA decision and a FEMA decision in the end.
Yeah, they'd have to determine cost and everything. But I look at you could either fix the problem at the north end, where you'd still have the water coming down, you just contain it a little bit, it'd still hit you guys. Or you could, at the south end of McGraw, they used to have an overflow system there, and they shut that down. You know, if they rebuilt that to flow down, it's downriver from everybody here anyways.
I think the thing that nobody ever realized was that all flow heat drains the other way.
All goes into Silver Creek.
Yeah.
All goes into the Silver Creek.
And I will tell you, so we have a book that I've started. I still haven't finished it because I don't have enough time to read. But it's called Water Always Wins. It's going to find its way. I mean, we've tried, we've tiled, we've channelized. You know, when Tara was talking about taking out these low head dam removals, that's part of it. Like the water is going to beat us in the end. I mean, we may not be here, but someone will, and it's going to come. So removing some of those hazards, removing some of those pinch points, and kind of, you know, there's been a lot of study and research and with floodplain management of, you know, reestablishing natural stream bank patterns. You'd be amazed at how many streams, and we have them in Illinois, where they've cemented them. They've just made them into these chutes that go through town. And maybe that's fine when it's just a little bitty, you know, little trickle that goes through, but when the waters come up, they're gonna fly through that area. And now you've got an increased just inherent risk to health and safety, because it's just a fire hose shooting through. So there is a lot of, I mean, we go to trainings and professional development stuff, and we have a conference coming up in early March, and that whole concept around, you know, reducing those risks and what project worked here and what project works in other places, those are some of the most exciting presentations to go to. So there's a lot of work in that area.
Sorry, I was going to add, it's not like there's unintended consequences of another problem.
Yep.
And I think what the big part of why Erin's here today and talk about all that, is she definitely talked about what they're doing, but the why is to try to prevent unintended consequences.
Yeah.
So we're trying to make it so that you cannot build in that area because you're going to affect that person next to you, and that's not fair.
Oh, yeah.
So we made it, you know, we're doing our part to try to not allow that to happen. Well, the local community has to make sure that happens.
They have a big responsibility.
Your regulation.
Yeah.
But then, but I think that's why I just wanted to know, but it sounds like there are maybe other alternatives. So it's, you know, you guys were just talking, well, you could do this, you could put some retention
Lots
over
of
here, you
things,
could
yeah.
increase the size, and that's where you just might need to do a little study and get your community
So
to
could
focus.
we engage IDNR to do a study? Possibly?
Would it engage with us or with IEMA through the grants?
Right.
Or
Possibly
the
there,
Corps of engineers?
It depends on the timeliness of how you want this study done.
Right.
I will say if it's the Corps, you're going to just get a comfortable chair, because they can take a while. They can.
Yeah, just with the funding.
And just with
Or you hire a consultant, your community can hire a consultant and they can evaluate that. But, you know, there are alternatives, and what it comes to is somebody bringing it to someone's attention. And I will say, each county I mentioned has to write a hazard mitigation plan, and they have to outline what hazards there are in their community, and then they have to point out what specific issues are occurring from that.
And I'm
That's
sure
when you
flooding
have
is
to be
included in
vocal,
yours.
and you have to let your leaders know that this is an issue, it's affecting a lot of people, and so it needs attention. And if it's in that hazard mitigation plan, it gets a little bit more traction.
And it's eligible for funding. So
Right.
I will say this,
have to get on the list.
but also to build on that, so first of all, because your county plan has been approved, doesn't mean it's set in stone. They can be modified. Like if that particular issue or general flooding concerns in East Dundee, if for any reason that wasn't included, should have gone to the meetings. But you can have plans can be modified, they just have to be reapproved. You can also get grant funds to pay for studies. So, there are a lot of options to a community, and it just needs to be sort of a more collaborative approach. You want to make sure that you're not, again, you don't want to fix one and then see 10 other problems crop up. And that's why, studying it before you do it. Because you might think, oh yeah, we'll just upsize that culvert and we'll be good. That's where you want to make sure you've got some professional modeling going into that, and you really look at it so that you're not diverting water somewhere else, because the water will have its way with us.
Oh, yeah,
So
so still comes.
the closed annexation agreement, is that signed, when is the February meeting, village meeting? Or is it, when is the next one, is it March? Okay,
That's
so,
village board meeting?
yeah,
1/17.
so that's the one that they're gonna approve the final, annexation agreement, and then they wanna develop within the next year.
And settle that water into the creek.
Exactly,
Yeah.
so if you bring up something right now, and you got a construction company, as part of that deal, development deal, well, then they should come down here and dig you out a culvert.
Yeah.
They got all the backhoes, that's what they do, right up the street.
Right, yeah.
And I would say just not to dismiss that. You do want to be careful that you're not just using that backhoe to dig out a bigger culvert and
They're
then,
massive, they do all highways.
Well, I know your point is that the water's still coming.
right.
Well, or that
And
you might
especially-
impact someone else.
Yes, and especially if there are development pressures.
Which
That's,
they impacted you
yeah.
inadvertently
Yeah.
already, so.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
In your work with FEMA, would you consider them likely to cooperate with revising floodway and floodplain maps based upon hydraulic modeling?
Yes, that's required, generally speaking. They use hydraulic and what am I not saying?
Hydrologic.
Yeah.
So what is your question?
So, there are several communities down the river with relatively large numbers of homes, private properties on the dam impoundments.
Mhm.
When the dams are removed, the floodplain will narrow. Maybe the floodway
Mhm.
will narrow, and that will be shown in modeling. Would FEMA be likely to step forward before the dams are actually taken out and approve changes in the floodplain, the floodway as a matter of, or as a means of encouraging public participation in support of the rules?
So that's a good question. I will tell you, the way that map would be modified is through a letter of map revision. They're probably not going to remap the whole area just from one project, but that's why, again, those letters of map revision, that process is baked into the system. So, and I don't know, do we do Clomars for
But I don't know
dam
if they do it
removals?
before the dam.
Well, so the reason I'm saying this, I'm not involved with our dam removals a whole lot, but modifications to the floodway. So if there is a project like a dam that would raise or lower the height of the floodway in Illinois more than 1/10 of a foot, technically speaking, under the NFIP program, you are required to get a conditional letter of map revision prior to initiating that project, which would require the applicant to come in with the H&H study, with the analysis of what this modification is going to do, and then get that okay from FEMA to go forward. Then you do the project, and then once the project is funded, that doesn't change the map. That just says, we think you're right, you're not going to raise that floodway. Because that really is what they're looking for. There's no increase in floodway. If you're decreasing the floodway, I have a problem with this in some communities. They lowered the floodway with some work that they did. They didn't get a conditional letter of map revision. Okay, that's technically a violation. But the real meat to that dinner is after the fact when you get the letter of map revision. And again, you need to bring that engineered study with as-built or as-removed documentation to show this is what we did, this is how the floodplain has been modified, these are the impacts to the floodway. And when FEMA approves those, that modifies the map. They may not reprint the map. what they'll do, and if you go onto the National Flood Hazard Layer, you can see they're usually larger, drawn-out spaces. They're in blue, not purple, and that's an area where there has been an approved letter of map revision, and that has modifications to the floodplain, and that's where you get that information.
Is that something that IDNR is currently doing or should have done or will need to do for the 6.5 dams that it owns downstream?
When we remove a dam, we have to get permits from our own agency. So even though I work with them, I have to get permits from them. So all that information would be a record, but I'm not familiar with the projects that you're talking about, or the ones that will be in the future, but we do have to go through that, and we have to show that there's no negative impact by the region of
Right.
of the flood.
Until January 1st of this year, state agencies were not required to get NFIP permits for work on state property. That's changed. We have new state law and new state rules that are in emergency status right now that they would have to. So that
But this would be a state project. Actually, it would be an Army Corps project that would pick up 35% local share would be from the state.
And I'm not sure exactly, it's going to be who has jurisdiction and ownership of that space. And so I'm not going to say who should or should not get letters of map revision. But yes, that is how that process is supposed to reflect changes when someone has revised the floodplain.
So should I be asking Wes to start filing those?
I have to ask if Wes has already done that. I don't know. So Wes is my supervisor. He's worked on the road and removal. So
And the others on down, so he's been a great resource.
Yeah, and I don't know, I will say technically, I'm not sure who has that ownership jurisdiction and who's required to get the letter of map revision, but you're right, boy, are we gonna get in trouble?
So, I'm right out the north.
But I can follow up.
What happens in East Dundee stays in East Dundee.
I will say
I told
this.
you we're a different agent, you were a different, she's the regulator, and I'm the helper.
I'm not even popular in my own office. But I will say, I mean, that's a really good question, because those letters of map revision, that is also, again, part of the community's responsibility is to ensure the integrity of the map. So communities should be asking, hey, you've come, you've made modifications to our floodplain reflected on the map. It's, at least for us, we've already got the engineers who've done the work, and that's where a lot of the expense comes in.
Yeah, I will follow up. I'll give you my card or something, but I honestly don't know. We do have to go through, it's just so complicated because when we do any type of project in the state, you have to get a permit from the Corps. Then we have to get a permit from EPA. Then we have to get a permit with our own agency.
Now we have to get two.
So all of those to do any single project, just like the regular community would have to.
And if it was only one permit from the agency, that would be.
We've got the joint permit application.
It is a joint permit, you submit it once and it goes to all the
The county,
agencies.
and the township, the municipality.
Well, we don't come to counties and local for state work on state-owned property. We don't come to locals for permission, and that's part of why state law changed. And I will tell you, in lots of parts of the state, IDOT comes in and they do their road, they do their thing. In flood fringe, they've not been getting permits. Now they will have to. They'll now have to get a permit from us, an NFIP compliant permit for flood fringe work. Because, again, I keep talking Metro East, but there's so many floodplain issues down there. They talk about, 255, putting this highway in 64, created dams that have caused, real modifications to their hydrology and, differences in flooding. So, now people get to come and I get to explain to other state agencies how we get to permit you. We're not charging for each other to get permit.
Yeah.
Which is
But now, because it was a January 1st, I don't know, maybe it hasn't been done, or maybe it hasn't, but it's certainly something out there to us as attention.
And I will not be in the office tomorrow, so I can avoid Wes, which may be good for me.
About the 50% home value as an improvement if you're in the floodplain. And does that include just maintenance, like a roof or
Roofing,
siding?
roofing and siding is considered to be improvements. And those are,
Eventually, you won't be able to maintain the home anymore if you get.
no, what happens is eventually, at a certain point, you've continued to improve your home. And let's just kind of look at it kind of in a logical way. You've got $100,000, and I use round numbers because I like to think easy. $100,000 home, you put new siding on it, you put a new roof on, that's probably about a $25,000, $30,000 investment, easy. And I'm talking about a smaller home. Okay, so you're 20,000, you've not hit that 50%. Life goes on. The next time you go to do a project on your home, so you're going to put in new cabinets. And they say, well, this is another 10,000, again, very high value cabinets. But hey, look, you've done all this other work. When we do your today fair market assessment, your home is now worth $175,000. Prices have gone up. You've just earned yourself another cushion in there. So it's not, you bought a $100,000 home, you always have a $100,000 home. It fluctuates. If the housing market crashes and everyone's home values drop into the pits, then everyone's going to be at 100% immediately, right? But generally speaking, homes appreciate, they grow in value. So we don't want people to scale out and just try to avoid having to bring their home into full compliance. Depending on your flood elevation, that could mean you lose your basement, or it could mean in Grafton you have 17-foot, your house is up on 17-foot high posts. But it does move, so that home value is not a set in stone target either. So if you maintain your home and you maintain the property, the community stays strong, which East Dundee is adorable driving in. No, you should be able to still maintain your home. You should be able to keep your home up and keep your property maintained, because that value will keep going up. So that they kind of, there is that hope. But we also don't want people coming in and buying a house that's being sold on very cheaply and gutting it. And I mean, I blame the HGTV for all of this. And I'm an addict. Like, I'm a hardcore addict. I love it. But those flippers, if you flip a flood damaged home, yeah, we don't want you taking something that, let's be quite honest, right now it's been substantially damaged. It needs a ton of work. We don't want you putting a basement back in there. We already know it's going to get damaged that badly. So that's kind of that concept there. It's those, largely we look at those big improvements. And also it gives your community a chance to say, hey, okay, you're redoing your kitchen. You might not want the marble in there. Maybe you want to go down to granite, and it gives you a little more flexibility to, if there is some damage, you've got percentages in there still. So it's a conversation. It should never be a yes or no. It should always be a conversation, and it's intended to give you information. But yes, you should be able to maintain your house. But if you want to flip it, you sell it to someone who wants to, do the HGTV and then flip it, well, then they probably should be bringing in these flood resilient protection standards, because they've just put a ton of money into a house that's at risk, by definition, by being in the floodplain. Yeah. You can paint your house, and you can do all the landscaping you want. Paint the landscaping. Yeah. Change your light bulbs any day. Okay. No, it is fairly stringent, but the reason it is because we don't want that thing that we hear about all the time of rebuilding and renovating homes that get damaged over and over and over.
And that's what we call repetitive loss. And then that costs you, the public, more in the long run as well. So we're trying to prevent that.
Yeah, and it put first responders at more risk. They know they're going to have to go out because this house is going to be underwater, and you're going to have all this stuff on the curb after the flood, and then you've got to clean everything up. Trying to avoid that. It's not supposed to be a gotcha program. It's supposed to be, let's get there together, although sometimes it is gotcha. And that's unfortunate, but it happens.
But the goal here was just to make our community resilient, and we're just trying to tell you what's out there. But I know it's getting late. Does anyone
You
have
guys
any
are super
other
helpful. It was
specific?
great. No, it really was great, because we were 5 years we lived there just waiting for something like this.
Well, I just want to say thank you very much for the invitation.
I got you.
I mean, this was great. Thank you guys. This was awesome. I'm very impressed with your local officials here. This was, we don't get these as much, so this is great.
I'll have the.
I'm taking samples.
Okay, sounds good.
I knew there was gonna be samples.
Three commercials on the river. So, yeah. Yeah, so, one thing is,
I